somebody made just horrible choices in their life. And I've seen people just fall flat on their face. And it's, I got to tell you, it can't be in judgment that I sit in those moments, because I know the struggles I have been through. And I know that the enemy could have focused all his attention on me at some point and knocked me down. I know the frailty of who I am. And listen, you need to know the frailty. If you don't understand your frailty, you will never understand your need. Because if you think you're strong in your own power, in your own wisdom, now how many would just sit here and say, listen, I got it all under... All right, so we're going to be transparent enough to say life's tough. And the enemy is pretty good at what he does. And he has knocked me out from under my legs a number of times. So we've seen broken lives, big failures, horrible choices, wrong paths. Oh, you're going to try it. Again, making a case that Jesus is the Lord, and you're going to need him. Shattered lives and those bad choices and this wrong paths. As we think about all that, I'm often left with these. Maybe you've thought this when you've watched somebody else go through this, but here are my 3 questions. Why don't you trust Jesus and his plans for you? Have you ever wondered when somebody's just, man, they're just hitting wall after wall after wall, and it's their own choosing, it's their own path, and you just think, why don't you trust Jesus? Why don't you try that? Why don't you trust Jesus and his plan for you? I know it's going to look different than your plan. Why don't you just trust Jesus? Or why don't you just do as Jesus commands you to do? You know, you may not be in this mess or in this relational conflict if you had just loved the Lord your God with all that you are and love one another. I mean, if you just start there and then follow through on what Jesus has said, this is the way you ought to live your life. Why don't you just do that? All right? Now, you may be carrying with me because you're kind of going, I know we think that, but it seems pretty bold to say the words out loud, doesn't it? Why don't you just do that? Or why don't you just follow Jesus daily? Because it seems to be your biggest problems are on Mondays and Friday nights. Why don't you daily? And then, as I think of these questions, they're echoed back to me, why don't I? Why don't I trust Jesus and his plan for me? Why don't I just follow Jesus daily? Why do I seem to leave him at home? So we're going to look at what it means that Jesus is Lord. We're going to look at a number of passages. And first, we're just going to look at the establishment of Jesus as Lord. Okay, so when I say the establishment, I mean beyond what you declare or I declare or what the world declares. This is who Jesus is in a universal scope, in an eternal scope, okay? And so let's read Luke chapter 2, 10 through 11. And this is the Christmas story, all right? And listen who says this. But the angel said to him, this is a messenger from God. This is a being of the heavenly realm. Says to them, do not be afraid. Speaking to the shepherds. Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which will be for all the people. For today in the city of David there has been born for you a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. There's the declaration. That's the establishment that Jesus, this baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying in a manger, this baby is Christ the Lord. That has been declared by a heavenly messenger straight from God. It is the declaration, the establishment that Jesus is Christ the Lord. Now, those two titles of Jesus, Christ, Christos, and Lord, Crucios, are often together. They're meshed together. We're going to talk a little more about that, but this is the divine declaration of Jesus as Christ the Lord, Christos and Kyrios in Greek. And note this. This news was given as good news of great joy. Okay? Remember that. Good news of great joy. Jesus is your Lord. I don't think we always receive Jesus as Lord of my life as good news. I think sometimes we're troubled by that and we fight against it. We rebel against the lordship of Jesus. We don't think it's a great thing that we have authority over us. It's a cultural problem for us today, especially in the United States of America, over our lives. The very beginning of the United States of America was to shrug off the chains of England, the kingship, the authority that they were putting over, and it was stifling the growth in America. We don't want to be under the authority of anyone but ourselves. So, I got to thinking about that. And I want to talk to you about what I call the Judge's Dilemma. When I say the Judge's Dilemma, I mean the book of Judges. So we're going to look at kind of the beginning of the book of Judges to the end of the book of Judges. And you're going to see a pattern. You're going to see a degradation. And you're going to understand a little about where it actually comes from. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to look at Judges 2, verses 8 through 10. And then we're going to follow that up with Judges 21, 25, and I'll put the references up there. So let's read the whole thing, and then we'll focus in on this part. So, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres. And all that generation also were gathered to their father. So it's saying that they kind of, that generation began to die out. Here it goes. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord. One generation later, a whole generation right after them that does not know the Lord, nor yet the work with which he had done for Israel. It had all been forgotten already. So this is where they're going to come into Judges. There rose a generation after them that did not know the Lord. Now this one, you'll see, it's all in caps, Lord. It's what we call the tetragrammaton. In the original Hebrew, it's not actually a word. There is no name for God. But this is as close as they would get it. They would put four letters of Hebrew together. And in English, it would be a Y, an H, a W, and an H. Yahweh is where we get that. Or Jehovah, which is kind of a way of looking at Yahweh. And it's meant to signify this unnameable. He's going to be way bigger than that name could ever signify. And so we use the tetragrammaton. And this is the way in English that we've always written it in the Old Testament, all caps, Lord. And an entire generation does not know the Lord and what the Lord has done for them. And what has the Lord done for Israel? The Lord saved them out of captivity, set their feet on a path to the promised land, provided for them along that journey, and got them to the promised land. I mean, he came through on all of his promises. This is what the Lord has done. One generation later, not even in the picture anymore. Who is the Lord? Who are you talking about? What are these stories that you're talking about? So here's the problem with the Judges, is it starts with people who have lost their understanding of who the Lord is. And then we go to the last part of Judges, Judges 21 through 25. We're going to read the whole passage there. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Do you see the correlation here? There's no king. They thought they needed a king because they're not ready to accept God as Lord of their lives anymore. So now we need a human king. There's no king. So everybody's just doing whatever they want to do in their own eyes. And it was We see a little of that in our own culture today. We're heading down this path, buddy. And so we're in the same place. And it all starts because people have decided to cast off this lordship of Jesus, who is God. It all begins there. I don't need God to be Lord of my life. I don't need Him to have authority over me. I don't need Him to call the shots in my life. I can take care of that stuff on my own. I want the good things of the Lord. I want Him to provide for me when I need it. I need to give me some direction when I want it. But other than that, leave me alone. We go down that path, doing whatever they want to do. So without spiritual leadership and social leadership, we are doomed to the same fate. We need a Lord. We need a spiritual leader and a social leader in our lives. We need that because we experience the same thing today. We need a leader to lead us. And I wrote down some of this. We need a leader who will administrate us and direct us, someone who will judge what is right or wrong and provide a system of reconciliation to make things right. This is what we need, because we don't know what's right or wrong anymore. We don't know what's good or bad anymore. It's all washed together. It's one just big gray mess. We need somebody to come in and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. We need somebody to truth. This is what we need. We need someone who will do this. But who is that going to be? Is there anybody in the history of humanity to declare what is truly right and have power? Do you know one candidate that you would vote for, that you would trust wholly to make those decisions for you? Who has ever been worthy enough for that job? Even King David had serious flaws and made some serious mistakes. Not only in his own personal and spiritual life, he had to atone for, but also in his leadership. He set on a path unknowingly that would lead to the decline of his line. So God, in the fullness of time, sent and established Jesus as Christ and Lord. This is why He was sent, because it's a mess. They need a leader. God has always set Himself to be that Lord of our lives. But we look at that word, and I think that there's a part of us that just cringes. I don't want to have somebody tell me who I am or what I should do. That if Jesus sets you free, and free, we are free indeed, and yet Jesus is our Lord. How do those things coincide? We look at it on such a negative level that we just don't get it, and so I think we have a hard time believing Jesus is Lord, trusting Him and giving Him those authorities. So, that's the establishment of Jesus as Lord. Let's go on to the resume, okay? The resume of Jesus to be the Lord. So what gives Him the qualifications? This would be a question for the Jews. The Jews would often ask, well, why Jesus? Why does Jesus have the right to be the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Christ? Why Him? Well, this is answered for us because you know somebody's going to challenge the right of Jesus to be the Lord, and I think we face that every day today. I think you and I face that on a daily basis. Is Jesus had the qualifications to be my Lord in this moment. And we live in a generation that has learned to doubt those who lead us, right? We have been lied to and manipulated too many times. We have lost faith in our leaders. And we end up translating that doubt to our relationship with Jesus. I'm a little hesitant. Colossians 1:15 through 18. This is a beautiful passage here. Colossians 1:15 through 18. This is by Paul, who is a lawyer at heart and training. And he's going to lay it out. He's going to answer that question. And he says this: He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. And wow, that's quite a resume. You start off with that, and you're like, okay. If there's anybody qualified to be Lord of my life, Jesus is it. No other has the qualifications of Jesus. No other was there in the beginning of all creation, that through him all things that are made were made. He was there at the beginning. He knows the plan and the design of God. He knows it because he was there. He's part of it. And so he knows me. He knows you. He knows what your design was. He knows the plans that were made for you. He knows all that. So if anybody is qualified to be Lord of my life or Lord of your life, it is this Jesus. There is no one else more suited. We get to the next portion here, which is the authority of Jesus as Lord. So now that we know that he has been declared and established as Lord, we know this is his resume. He definitely is qualified. Now let's talk about what it means that he has authority. In many of your Bibles, again, you're looking at that tetragrammaton, which signifies the unspoken name of God. Now suddenly we are introduced to Jesus, who is the Lord of Lords. There's a connection there. It's the continuation. And so we read out of Acts chapter 2, 34 through 36. Again, we're making this case. For it was not David who ascended into heaven. Do you hear that? It's not David, because he says this. Peter says this because David is their hero. All right? The Hebrew people, they're going to celebrate Abraham. They're going to celebrate Joshua, Moses. They're going to celebrate David. Those are the heroes of their society. And so, listen to this. It was not David who ascended into heaven. It wasn't David who you gladly look at and said, I wish I had a king like David, because ever since then, all the kings have been miserable failures, right? I mean, some of them were absolutely horrible failures. They were evil in the eyes of the Lord, over and over again. And then even now, their king, Herod, is actually a puppet king appointed by Rome to govern them. It's not even a true king. And so people would sit there and go, oh, I wish I lived in the days of David. I wish I had someone like David as king over my life. I would gladly follow that king. I would gladly submit myself to that king. But this king, I can't follow. I can't submit myself to. I don't want to follow this king. Oh, I wish I had a king like David. And listen to this. He says, it wasn't David who ascended into heaven. Your greatest hero still wasn't qualified to be your Lord. But you're on the right path. And then there's a quote from the Old Testament that says, the Lord said to my Lord, did you hear that? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. He's making a case about that and says, you understand, even then he's talking about Jesus. He's appointing Jesus as the Lord who's going to be the victor over your enemies. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him both Lord, Kyrios, and Christ, Christos, this Jesus whom you crucified. There he always plays that out there. Whom you crucified. And Kyrios, this word Lord, is all through the New Testament. Top, the most. There is no one that tells Jesus what to tell us. It is his. Now we're getting down to the heart of the message. Jesus is Lord and has been given authority over all humanity. And some are going to hear that And they're going to respond to it in different ways. He has been given authority over you in your life, your destiny. So how do we see that all the time, right? You can rebel against it, say, not I. You have no power over me. Leave me alone. You can ignore it and say, you know what? God just isn't a real thing in my life. I'm just going to go do my own thing and hope for the best. Or you can submit to it. Now, however you decide to respond to it doesn't change the fact, and this is an important point to make here. Jesus is Lord of your life, not because you accepted him, but because he's been appointed and qualified for that. He is the Lord of your life. Whether you rebel against it, ignore it, or submit to it, in the last day, you are all under the same moment, the same judgment by him. The only one who is qualified to judge. All of us will be. You can ignore it, you can rebel about it, but it won't change it. You will still have to face it. Or you can submit to it now and find the joy. To find the goodness, to find the freedom, the something to be dreaded or rebelled against. It's something to be joyfully embraced. Because what he has for you is better. It's better than what anything in the world has ever thrown at you. It's better than any plan you could ever have. I've experienced this so many times, it just blows my mind how many times, just in the last 8 years, that I thought, oh God, I'm going to start praying for this because it'd be wonderful to see 50 people in this room. I used to pray that prayer. Last week we had 158. Oh Lord, wouldn't it be awesome if we started a service off-site where people could come and we'll call it Ragamuffin and it'd be good, and maybe the coffee shop would be just right because, it's not going to be a lot of people. To find out later it's not big enough. We're going to have to have our own building. I sit over there sometimes at the front porch and just in the morning I just look at the big room and I just already all the things that have happened in there. I'm blown away. Listen, God's plan is way better than mine. I think way too small, and I'm a big dreamer. I think way too small. I'm learning to joyfully embrace that Jesus is Lord of my life, because when I do, he's got great plans for me. And they're better and bigger than anything I would have ever thought of. So many kind of try to hedge their bets and claim many lords in their life. Whether you realize you're doing that or not, you may find you have many lords over your life, many things that direct you or have authority over you or control you. Okay? And so we try to kind of hedge our bets. Career, money, love, themselves, and then possibly Jesus on Sundays, So Jesus simplifies this problem for us by boiling it all down and giving us two possible lords of our life. Just two. Jesus and the great deceiver. So here's what Jesus warns us in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. When he says masters, guess what word that is in Greek? Kurios. That's what the word is lords. No one can serve two lords. And then he explains why. He says, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God. And then this she's talking about wealth. You can't serve both of them. It's claiming lordship of your life. And you will drive yourself to insanity trying to please both lords. How many of you in here would just admit, I'm a pleaser. I like to make everybody happy around me. We've got some pleasers around here. How happy are you when you try doing that? Only when you're successful once in a while, right? And undoubtedly, you're successful with one, maybe two, while three or four are pretty upset with you. You just can't. You can't please everybody. You will fail miserably trying to obey both voices. So here's the question asked today: is Jesus your Lord? Is Jesus your Lord? Now to him it's a yes or no, right? It's a yes or no. But I think we like to think there's a third option. We like to wonder, can I just put maybe or sometimes? Is Jesus your Lord? Maybe. Sometimes. It's probably the most truthful way of answering it. But that isn't one of the choices. It's not even on the test written that way. You have yes or no. And I hope, I hope you don't come to this test like I did ACT test many years ago, hoping for the best, and thinking, I got a 50-50 shot. Now listen, you're either 100% right or you're 100% wrong. Right? So is Jesus your Lord? Can you claim that? Have you accepted that? So now we get to the last part of this. Because trusting and submitting to Jesus as your Lord will change your life and your direction. Maybe that's why people are afraid. I'm afraid to commit and say Jesus is Lord of my life because I think things are going to change. Yes, they're going to change. That's not a bad thing. Let them change. It's possible that no matter how comfortable you've gotten in your life, it's not nearly as good as it was meant to be. So trust God, trust His Lordship, accept it, walk in it, and let it change your life. Let it change your direction. So let's talk about the personal declaration of Jesus as Lord. Romans 14. For not one of us lives for himself. Not one dies for himself. For if we live, die for the Lord. Does that feel like full submission? Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's, both of the dead and of the living. This is 100% yes, 100% no. Either He's the Lord of your life in the good times and the bad, in life and in death, or He is not really your Lord. I want you to think about this. Your entire life will be marked by obedience or disobedience, faith or doubt, following or rebelling. Your identity is found in these concepts. Obedience, disobedience, faith, doubt, following, or rebelling. You could add living or dying. Do you believe in the authority of Jesus over your life? Do you accept Christ of Jesus, the Christhood of Jesus? That's the salvation. I want to be saved. I want to be clean. So we accept the Christos, but we rail against the Kurios. Yet these two titles, back to back, dependent upon each other. We're going to sing this last song just as a processing moment. And I want you to think about this. Every sin, everything. If you understand that sin is a rebellion against God and God's will in your life, every sin at its root is a lordship issue. Whether you trust that Jesus has authority, whether you trust Jesus' plan for your life, whether you trust Jesus' declarations over you, His promises to you, whether you trust Jesus' identity given to you, that you are a son of the living Most High God, whether you trust that or you don't, and in those moments when you don't, you find yourself sliding into selfishness, immorality, ungodliness, unrighteousness. I didn't trust Jesus. I didn't let Him be Lord of my life in this moment. Because Jesus would have told you, that's not my plan for you. Don't touch that. Don't look at this. Don't follow after him or her. Sometimes Jesus says, let go of this so you can grab hold of this. It's all a lordship issue. So as we head into this last moment of worship, are you ready to go beyond the altar of salvation with Christ and submit at the cross, where Jesus not only qualified but earned your obedience? Would you rise up, please?